Welcome to the Buick Outdoors Podcast. I'm your host, Sheldon Marion, and on this podcast, we dive deep into the outdoors. We discuss hunting and fishing techniques, give you tips and tricks, tell stories, and everything in between to help you enjoy the outdoors. This podcast is brought to you by Northbound Gear. Northbound Gear is designed for maneuverability and durability and is made to last through even the toughest of elements. My go-to for their pants is the water resistance adventure pants and their lined waterproof jeans. I've worn them while out ice fishing, crawling through the woods bear hunting, and on the west coast out on the boat. And I even wear them around when I'm having a lazy day at the house. They are that comfortable. They also offer jackets, summer pants, backpacks, and many more. Men's and women's sizes are available, and by partnering with One Tree Planted, you're planting a tree with every purchase. Check them out for yourself at northboundgear.co, and when you use my promo code Sheldon15 at checkout, you'll receive 15% off your order. That's northboundgear.co and promo code Sheldon15. Hey everyone, welcome back to another Buick Outdoors podcast. If you're new around here, I'm your host Sheldon Marion, and today we're going to be talking about how to sight in a new rifle. It's hunting season here now. So everybody's kind of getting pumped up and fired up. And if you're like me, you went out and you bought yourself a nice brand new rifle. Either that or it's been kind of sitting around for many years and you haven't shot it. And, you want to make sure that you're all sighted in. You don't want to be missing your prized possession chickens or the nice big bull elk or bull moose or, your nice 160-inch whitetail deer kind of a thing. And, if you do happen to buy something brand new from a store, it should come bore sighted, but if not, that's where we're going to start off. And, if you don't know what bore sighting is, basically what it is you take your gun, and I have a diagram here that I'll show you here for the people watching this on YouTube. If you're just listening to this on Spotify or whatever, head over to YouTube and check it out. But anyways, when you first start out, you take your gun and you put it on something real solid, like a shooting rest, the bean bags or the little molded ones, whatever you want to call it. And you take your barrel out and you look down your barrel at the target. And while I'm talking about this, I'll just grab my little diagram that I drew up here, and it's a bit rough, but it'll give you a real good idea. So what we got here is we're going to pretend this is your gun set up on some sort of a shooting system where your gun is sitting there nice and solid and it's not going to move. And what you're looking at here with the spirals and stuff, that'd be with your bolt removed. So if you take your bolt out, you look down the barrel and you center your barrel onto your target. So on here we have a little blue dot right in the center of our barrel. Now, without moving the rifle, you want to look up through your scope as if you were ready to shoot. And what you're going to see is you'll see your target in your scope, but your crosshairs are most likely going to be off a little bit. And my lines are not exactly perfect, but looking at this, if this was at 100 yards, it looks as though we're about three quarters of an inch to the left and roughly half an inch high, we'll say. So then what you would have to do in this instance is, if it's at 100 yards, you would have to move your crosshairs over to where it's actually centered to your target. So with the majority of rifle scopes, you'll see when you take your turret covers off, that's those little caps on the top and the side of your scope, it'll say 1/4 MOA. And what that means is 1/4 inch minute of angle at 100 yards. And to simplify it, that means one click will move your crosshairs over 1/4 of an inch at 100 yards. So if we are 3/4 of an inch to the left, we need to take our turret and we have to turn it 3 clicks to move it to the right. And on your turret itself, typically there's an R indicator on the right side of the turret, and it'll have an arrow. Usually it's counterclockwise. So if we need to move our reticle to the right 3/4, you look at your turret with the caps off, and it'll say R, and there'll be a directional arrow, and you just, for this one, you simply turn it 3 clicks in the right direction, not left, because we need to move the crosshairs to the right. And then seeing how we're about a half an inch high, you look at the turret that's on top, and there'll be a U, meaning up. So if you want to move your crosshairs up, you turn it in the direction that that arrow is pointing, and usually that's counterclockwise as well. But in this instance, we need to bring it down. So if it says up is counterclockwise, we have to turn it clockwise. And with this, we called it what, half inch high. So the up and down is the same as left and right, where it's a 1/4 inch MOA. So with this one being a half inch high, we have to turn it down 2 clicks, because 1/4 plus a 1/4 equals a half. So once you make those adjustments, you should be able to look through your crosshairs. And again, without moving your gun, it'll look like this one over here. So with your bolt still removed and looking down through your barrel, you'll see that your target is centered in your barrel. And then when you look up at your scope, your crosshairs should be centered on your target. And then that's a rough sketch and a rough idea on bore sighting. And it's a phenomenal way to start. If you don't want to take that route, what you can do, there's new bore sighting lasers that are on the market now. Some of them just go into the tip of your barrel, and you turn the little laser on, and you can see a little laser dot on your target. And then what you do there, same thing with your gun being in a steady stationary position, is where that laser hits the target, you adjust your scope to the laser. And then there's also slightly better ones where it's the same concept of a laser, except it's an actual kind of like a bullet. So it's actually chambered to your gun. So say you're shooting a 30-06, you buy like this little 30-06 looking shell, you turn it on, it's a laser, and you actually feed it into your action, close the bolt, and then that way that laser points down through your barrel, hits the target, and it's the same thing with the other laser. You adjust your scope to where that laser is hitting. And then that way you can have like a pretty good start as to where your rifle should be shooting. And I know a lot of guys, once they bore sight their rifles, they just start shooting at 100 yards. But for me, just to make things a little bit easier, because sometimes even when you are bore sighted, you pull the trigger at 100 yards and you can still be way off, and sometimes you even miss the target, and it's really hard to see. So honestly, what I do is I start at 50 yards, and it'd be the same concept as if you're shooting at 100 yards. Once you're all nice and bore sighted and all that good stuff, I set up a target at 50 yards, take a shot, and usually like the first 1 or 2 rounds, especially out of a brand new rifle, is kind of what I would call almost like a fouling round, where it's gonna go where it's gonna go. Once you take those first 2 shots, then your third one is kind of where you start to kind of get serious about it. So you take a shot, and wherever it hits is wherever it hits. I'll shoot a second round, and if it's within like an inch of the first one, then I'll call that kind of close enough. I know where the bullets are going, and there's not some sort of a burr or anything like that in the barrel, because you gotta think when it's a brand new barrel, it pretty well came off the manufacturing line, got put onto an action, got put into a stock, and then sent to the store and into your hands, kind of a thing. So there might be some small little filings or a little bit of grease and oils and stuff like that inside the barrel. So your first couple of shots should kind of clean all that stuff out. some guys, they'll say, clean your rifle before shooting it, kind of a thing, and you can do that. But in this case, we're just gonna pretend that you just bought a gun, went out and shot it, right? So at 50 yards, you take your first two shots, kind of let them do whatever, and your third shot is when you start to dial in your rifle. So I'll take a shot, and it's usually off that little bit. And again, it's just like when you're bore sighting it. Uh, at 50 yards, though, is not going to be a quarter-inch MOA. It's almost like an eighth of an inch MOA, just because you're much closer. So what I'll do is I'll shoot and I'll adjust until I'm pretty well dead center at 50 yards, and it doesn't take much. Typically, once you kind of get rid of those first couple fouling rounds, you have maybe 3 shots to kind of adjust your scope. And then once it's hitting pretty well dead center, kind of a thing, then I'll take it out to that 100 yards, and then I'll actually finalize sighting it in. So once you're set up at 100 yards, it's basically the same exact thing at 50 yards. You got your shooting bag set up, or your shooting rest, or whatever it is that you're using. The old school days, it was a jacket or a backpack over the hood of the truck, and we call that good enough, right? And so basically at 100 yards, depending on what you want to sight your rifle in at, some people do it dead on at 100, some it's an inch, some it's inch and a half, and then some people it's 2 inches. Kind of the going rate is like an inch high at 100 yards is pretty well what you'd typically sight in a rifle for. I like mine being that inch to inch and a half, and that way, if there is a little bit of a stretch out there at 300 or 400 yards, you still don't really have to do any adjustments. Really, you have to aim just slightly high, but even with my 300 Win Mag shooting 200 grain bullets, I believe at 400 yards, I want to say I'm about 20 inches low. So for a deer, you might want to adjust a little bit, but when it comes to like a moose or an elk, really just aim slightly high. You don't have to do much. You know what I mean? Like, if you're not comfortable shooting at ranges, then just, walk in a little closer, kind of a thing. But, anyways, back to sighting in the rifle. Once as you're pretty well close to dead on at 50 yards, at 100 yards, you're not going to be making too many adjustments. As long as you got your left and right dialed in at 50, at 100, it's mainly just going to be going up or down, kind of a thing. It might be a quarter to a half inch off left and right, but for the most part, you're typically like pretty well set for left and right, anyways. But at 100 yards, real simple. Turn your scope to like a 9 power, or like an 8 if you're using like a 3 to 9 by 40 kind of a thing, which is kind of like the kind of going, like your typical hunting scope kind of a deal. And when you're sighting in your rifle and when you're shooting in general, what I tell people is you don't sit there with your finger off the trigger and slam it shut, kind of a thing. What I try to teach people is rest your finger on the trigger and slowly squeeze it in. Because in that way, when you're doing that, you have like this much movement, right? The tip of your finger's moving. When you sit there and your finger is off the trigger, and when you go to shoot, you just make one real quick snap motion. Like, even as I'm sitting here pretending to pull the trigger out just on my hand, I can feel the tension. There's movement in my finger, there's torque in my wrist, there's movement in my forearms, there's movement in my shoulder. There's so much that can actually make that rifle move. And it's one of those things where, the further you get from your rifle, this is where, if you get real scientific into like the minute of angle stuff, you look at a clock, and 1 minute kind of equals like 1 degree almost. So at the gun itself, if you move say it's a 16th of an inch. It's nothing, right? But at 100 yards in a straight line, that 16th of an inch that was here, now it's kind of doing this. It's going way out. So a 16th of an inch at the rifle itself, it might be a half an inch or 3/4 of an inch at 100 yards. And if it's even further out there, say 400 yards, you might be like 8 inches kind of a thing. I'm just spitballing numbers here. I don't really know the whole minute of angle, like the actual proper numbers and all that. But you kind of get the idea. So when you just barely set your finger on that trigger and you just slowly squeeze until it almost scares you when it goes off, then that way it's one slow fluid motion, and when it goes off, it just goes boom, right? That way there's no torque in your wrist, there's no, you're not moving the rifle whatsoever. The only thing that's moving is just the trigger. So at 100 yards, once you're pretty well set and dialed in left to right at 50, at 100 yards, you take your time, go nice and calm, nothing to be freaked out about, right? And you just send one downrange. And where it hits, it's usually left and right. It's going to be usually pretty darn close. And then up and down, chances are you might be slightly low, or you might be just dead on. So then all you have to do is you look at your turrets. Again, it should say 1/4 MOA, which is, to simplify it, 1/4 of an inch at 100 yards. So if you're, say, a half inch low, you just look at your turret on the top of your scope and it'll say U, and the arrow will be pointing counterclockwise most likely. And so if you're a half inch low and you want to be, say, an inch high, you have to come up by half inch and then another 4, so that's 6 clicks. So you just grab your turret, count them out. Some turrets, you can hear a real audible click when you're turning it. Others, there's just a little line and there's some numbers on the side. So say it's at whatever, 10. Turn it back to 9, which would be 4, and then go to 8.5, kind of a deal. Or maybe I got my numbers backwards, 10 to 11.5, kind of a thing. But anyways, once you make that adjustment, take another shot. And once you by then it should be fairly close. Like, it does not take a lot of shots to actually sight in a rifle. And one thing you have to consider too is you could be up and down or left and right, kind of like a plus or minus half inch. Because for a rifle to be quote unquote like a good shooting gun, 1 inch MOA or 1 inch group at 100 yards is a good shooting gun. So once as you believe you're roughly that 1 inch up and dead center, take a shot. And you might be an inch up and half inch to the left. That's fairly close within that 1 inch span of where you want to be. Load up another round and shoot again. You might be an inch up and a half inch to the right now. But half inch left, half inch right, you're still within 1 inch. Then again, load a third round and shoot, and instead of being an inch up, maybe you're 2 inches up, but dead center. You're still, again, within that 1 inch group of where you want to be. And to be honest with you guys, if this is just your regular kind of everyday hunting rifle, if you have a gun that shoots like 1.5 or 2 inch groups at 100 yards, I'm gonna be the one to tell you right now that's good enough. You don't need pinpoint accuracy. The chances of you shooting anything past 300 yards are slim, and really, if you have a 2 inch group at 100 yards and you shoot something at 200 yards, you're gonna nail it. You're not taking this rifle out to do any competitions. I have guns, I have one that'll do what we call cloverleaf, where all 3 shots are touching. And that one at 400 yards, if you want me to shoot something in the neck, I pretty well can almost guarantee you that I can hit it in the neck. But I'm never going to take that shot. So even that gun that does like that high precision, pinpoint, deadly accuracy, I'm never going to need it. Rock. Because even at 400 yards, I'm still going to shoot for the vitals. I'm still going to, if it's an elk, my target is still this big. Go behind the shoulder, shoot for both lungs. Maybe you'll hit like a little bit low and you might ram it through its heart, kind of a thing. But as an ethical hunter, really, you're going for a vitals shot. If there's something at, say it's a moose at 100 yards and the only shot you have is kind of a neck shot. If you're shooting a 2-inch group, I don't know about you, but a moose's neck is a lot bigger than 2 inches. Granted, the way that everything kind of comes up, you have to be within a pretty tight window. But even then, it's still about a 6-inch target at 100 yards. So if you're shooting 2 inches, you're still within 6 inches, right? So, just kind of pay attention to that kind of stuff and don't get overwhelmed with how tight your groups are and stuff like that. For me, if my gun shoots within 1 to 2 inch groups at 100 yards, that's good enough for me. Plus, it's in the back of your mind that, hey, this, whatever, say it's your 30-06. If you decide to pack that that day, just remind yourself, like, this is a 2-inch gun. So if you want to shoot something, get within 200 yards and you'll be perfectly fine. The whole long range hunting stuff, if you take your time and you go through maybe some courses or you do a whole pile of shooting to where you are hitting extremely accurately and extremely consistent, sure, you can kind of stretch it a little bit. For me, I'm comfortable to 400 yards because I've done, I don't know how many shots at 400 yards. 500, I wouldn't take that shot. Plus, there's so many variables that go into play. Wind speed, air density, the curvature of the earth, the temperature, how thick the air is or how thin the air is. It makes it so your bullet doesn't fly through the air consistently. Your height, your elevation, your angle. There is so much that goes into this stuff where, like, if you haven't actually practiced at those ranges, just don't take those shots and stay within the ethical ranges of the 100 to 300 yards. And even 300 yards for a lot of people, that's a far shot. And, to be honest with you, if you're 300 yards away and you don't feel comfortable, get closer. If something is out there at 300 yards and it has its head down, minding its own business, and has no clue that you're there, there's no reason whatsoever why you can't get up closer, within 200, 250 yards, kind of a thing. But yeah, so when it comes to sighting in your rifle, very, very simple process. If it doesn't come bore sighted from the place that you bought it from, it's a pretty easy, simple solution to do yourself. When you are bore sighting it, it's a lot easier to do it at 50 yards just because you can see that target a little bit better. And then once as you have it bore sighted, take your first couple of shots at 50 yards to mainly get your left and right dialed in, and then stretch it out to 100 yards, and that'll mainly get your elevation and to fine tune your left and right. And basically take, when you're shooting, don't shoot extremely fast. It'll warm up your barrel, and then when metal gets hot, it expands. When it expands, your bullets won't sit quite as tight in the grooves of your barrel. So, and as it goes down, instead of being nice and tight and rotating the way it should, there'll be a little bit of a slop, a little bit of play in it, So then your groups will start to open up. And then yeah, just practice. When you're done shooting, it is a good idea to clean out your rifle. Unless you're going to be hunting right away. Uh, there's a lot of times where, I'll be honest with you, I don't clean my gun after I shoot it. There's a lot of times where I've cleaned a gun out, and done a real nice deep clean on the barrel kind of thing, taking it out to the range, pulled the trigger, and all of a sudden I'm 2 inches to the right. And the second shot, I'm back to dead center. Because for whatever reason, the oils or something, maybe it makes it a little too slick in there or something, or there's something that goes on in there. And if you're getting ready to go hunting, especially on like a once in a lifetime hunt, what I would suggest you do is you take your rifle out, sight it in, and when you're done sighting it in, put it away dirty. And don't clean it until you come back from that hunting trip. Because there's a good chance you're gonna be off slightly. And also another thing too, when once you're sighted in, you're sighted in for that one specific bullet. So for an instance, my 300 Win Mag this spring, I had uh, Federal Premium shooting 180 grain Berger hybrids, and then this fall I have 300 Win Mag 200 grain Terminal Ascent from Federal. And when I took out the 200 grains, they were pretty close to the 185 Bergers, but I think I was about an inch to the right and half inch low. So it was close, but I wasn't dialed into these new bullets. So once you're sighted in, shoot the same bullets from the same box of ammo. For the most part, you can buy like a second box as long as it's the same, and it should be pretty close. And just stick with those bullets that you have. If you have to change your ammo up, or if it's like how it is recently, where I went from shooting 180 grain, I think they're Bear Claws, to the 185 grain Barnes, and now the 200 grain Terminal Ascent, because bullets are just extremely hard to find right now. Unfortunately, every time you buy a new box of bullets, you got to take your gun out and shoot it and make sure it's shooting straight. But hopefully this kind of helps you out a little bit on how to sight in a rifle. And if you're one of the old timers who's been around for a while, you probably just listen to me kind of ramble on for however long this has been going on for, and you already know. But there are new people around here that have absolutely no clue what they're doing, or you just need a kind of reminder every once in a while. But anyways, guys, I hope you enjoyed this podcast. If you're just listening to this, I'd really appreciate it if you went over to our YouTube channel and subscribe to the channel, and then you can watch this. When I have little diagrams like this, you can actually see my funky little drawings, and it also helps us out quite a bit. But anyways, if you like it, hit that like button down the bottom there and leave me a comment or two. Subscribe to the channel. I'll see you on the next one.